of senators, the vote will be in about 10 minutes following my remarks. And I want to make my remarks because of the importance of this nomination. I joined the senator from Washington State in urging our colleagues to vote to end debate on the nomination of Dr. Califf, and then tomorrow to vote for him. We're very fortunate to have a man of this distinction accept this position. I congratulate the president for his nomination. And I note, as the senator from Washington said, that his nomination has been widely applauded across this country and received strong bipartisan support in our committee after an intensive investigation. I would like to include in the record, following my remarks, a list of the following 118 organizations who've submitted letters in support of Dr. Califf's nomination to our committee. The list does not include press releases or other statements of support that were not submitted to the committee.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, Dr. Califf will be in charge of the Food and Drug Administration. That agency is responsible for the safety and effectiveness of our nation's medicines, devices, and other medical products in protecting our country's food supply. It is not too much to say that this job affects virtually every single American. It is a huge job. The FDA affects nearly every single American and regulates about a quarter of all consumer spending in the United States, about $4 trillion annually. It's responsible for product areas as diverse as prescription drugs for humans as well as for animals, for medical devices, for biologics, for cosmetics, over-the-counter medications, food, and tobacco. To accomplish this, FDA employs 15,700 full-time employees worldwide with an annual total budget of $4.5 billion from funds appropriated by the Congress and user fees paid by the industries it regulates. Managing an enterprise of this size is no small undertaking. It requires strong leadership and a steady hand. Last year on September 17, the President nominated Dr. Califf. My staff and I have reviewed the nomination carefully. I found him to be well qualified to take charge of the FDA. He is one of the nation's leading cardiologists. He was a professor at one of the nation's top medical schools for over 30 years. He's an expert on clinical research. He's been recognized by the Institute of Scientific Information as one of the top 10 most cited authors with more than 1,200 peer-reviewed publications. He has managed large organizations, including the Duke Clinical Research Institute as a founding director. In his current position, he's FDA's Deputy Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco, in which capacity he oversees the regulation of products including human drugs, biological products, medical devices, and tobacco. He's conducted scores of important clinical trials and has advised and worked on research with some of the nation's leading pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical companies. In addition, Dr. Califf, like every full-time nominee, has been through an in-depth process to review his background. Before the President even announced his nomination, there was an extensive vetting by the White House and the FBI. He submitted paperwork to the Office of Government Ethics, which carefully reviewed that information looking for conflicts of interest. The form he submitted in public is public. It includes every source of income over $200, every asset worth more than $1,000, every potential conflict that the Office of Government Ethics determined would require a recusal. Before our committee held a hearing, Dr. Califf answered 37 pages of questions from the bipartisan leadership of the committee, including confidential questions on financial information. He responded to written follow-up questions. His responses included over 3,000 pages of articles and lectures my staff and Senator Murray's staff reviewed, and any member of the Senate could review. On November 17, the Health Committee held a hearing on his nominations. He provided testimony, took questions. Afterwards, he answered 100 pages of written questions. Throughout this response, we've carefully reviewed everything submitted and have not found anything that would call into doubt Dr. Califf's ability to lead the FDA fairly, ably, and impartially. I'm pleased to support his nomination. I'm pleased the full Senate now will have an opportunity to vote on that nomination in a prompt way. Dr. Califf's nomination comes at an important time for the FDA. The FDA for the past year has been operating without a confirmed commissioner. There are important issues there, and it needs a confirmed commissioner to provide the leadership that will carry the agency into the future. One issue that's been on many of our minds is how to make sure that American patients have access to affordable drugs. The FDA's job, of course, is not to set drug prices. And I'm pleased Dr. Califf agreed at his confirmation hearing that he understands the FDA's role is to make sure that drugs are safe and effective, not to regulate their price. But the FDA can help lower drug prices by approving generic drugs and other products as quickly as it possibly can. So there's more choice and competition in the market. The thousands of applications for generic drugs sitting at the FDA awaiting approval. Addressing this backlog and reviewing new applications as expeditiously as possible will allow lower drug costs to be available to patients. I'm confident the FDA can improve its performance. Just last month, our committee held a hearing on this issue, and the FDA was optimistic about making progress. We also need a confirmed commissioner who can guide the agency to make sure it keeps pace with medical innovation. There has never been a more exciting time in medical research than today. We know more about biology and medicine than ever before, and knowledge is being applied in innovative ways. We're talking about actually curing, not just treating cancers. We're using 3D printing to help doctors replace knees. And in one case, the FDA has approved a drug to treat epilepsy that is made by 3D printing. And the President has announced a precision medicine initiative designed to promote personalized treatments that take into account an individual's genes, environment, and lifestyle. These are exciting developments. But first, the FDA needs to make sure that regulation is appropriate. Too much regulation could reduce investment. Not enough regulation could lead patients to getting therapies that are not safe and effective. And at the same time, the FDA will need to make sure that its policies and its procedures, many of which were adopted decades ago, are capable of addressing the technologies of today and tomorrow. Second, as we continue to make medical advances, the FDA will need to keep up with the science and rely on expertise outside FDA when appropriate. Doing that will require a leader who can manage a large and complex organization, not just on big policies that make headlines, but on day-to-day matters like hiring and training scientists on the core mission and integrating information technology. Medical products take more time and money to discover, develop, and reach American patients than ever before. We hear stories about drugs and devices that are available to patients outside the U.S. before they become available here, often because it's difficult for manufacturers to navigate the FDA's often unclear approval requirements. It often takes over a decade to develop a drug that gains marketing approval in the U.S. According to one recent study, the costs have tripled in the last 10 years. Senator Murray and I are working with our colleagues on our committee on bipartisan legislation to help get safe cutting-edge drugs, medical devices, and treatments into American medicine cabinets and doctors' offices more quickly. We held a markup on February 9 in which we approved 7 important bills with bipartisan support that will help both manufacturers and the FDA to get innovative treatments to patients more quickly. I will include more about these in the record if I may ask consent to do that.
Without objection.
But they are all bipartisan bills. Senator Bennett, Warren, and Hatch have a bill helping children with cystic fibrosis. Senator Burr and Franken offered a bill that will help millions who need a medical device such as a pacemaker to have that more rapidly. Senator Baldwin and Collins offered a bill which we approved that will help the National Institutes of Health create opportunities for new funding. Senators Kirk and Bennett, Hatch, Murkowski, Isaacson, Collins offered legislation that we approved that would help Americans with disabilities and chronic diseases, perhaps a stroke, for example, relearn skills. Isaacson and Murphy offered another piece of legislation. Senator Murray herself offered an important bill on preventing superbugs and Protecting Patients Act that was particularly affected by an incident in her state of Washington. And Senator Murray and I offered legislation that our committee has worked together on to try to improve information technology, which is essential to any of the advances that we make. We'll be taking up more of these proposals in March and in April. So, Mr. President, the next FDA commissioner will have a lot of work to do, both to implement the legislation that we're passing and to take the existing authority and make sure that we help patients as best we can. He will be, as I said, dealing with 1/4 of the consumer spending in the United States and affecting virtually every American. He is the right person for this job. I strongly encourage my colleagues to vote for Dr. Califf, first today to end debate on the nomination, and tomorrow, once that's ended, to confirm him in this important position. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.